Q-ships, also known as Q-boats, decoy vessels, special service ships, or mystery ships, were heavily armed merchant ships with concealed weaponry, designed to lure submarines into making surface attacks. This gave Q-ships the chance to open fire and sink them. They were used by the British Royal Navy, RN, and the German Kaiserliche Marine during the First World War, and by the RN, the Kriegsmarine, and the United States Navy during the Second World War, 1939–45. Early uses. In the 1670s, HMS Kingfisher, 1675, was specially designed to counter the attacks of Algerian corsairs or pirates in the Mediterranean by masquerading as a merchantman, hiding her armament behind false bulkheads. She was also provided with various means of changing her appearance. During the French Revolutionary Wars, a French brig disguised as a merchantman, with hidden guns and most of her crew below decks, was beaten off by the privateer lugger Vulture out of Jersey 183. First World War. In the First Battle of the Atlantic, Britain was by 1915 in desperate need of a countermeasure against the U-boats that were strangling her sea lanes. Convoys, which had proved effective in earlier times, and would again prove effective during the Second World War, were rejected by the resource-strapped Admiralty and the independent captains. Depth charges of the time were relatively primitive, and almost the only chance of sinking a submarine was by gunfire or by ramming while on the surface. The problem was how to lure the U-boat to the surface. A solution to this was the creation of the Q-ship, one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Their code name referred to the vessel's home port, Queenstown, in Ireland. These became known by the Germans as a U-boot fall, U-boat trap. A Q-ship would appear to be an easy target, but in fact carried hidden armaments. A typical Q-ship might resemble a tramp steamer sailing alone in an area where a U-boat was reported to be operating. By seeming to be a suitable target for the U-boat's deck gun, a Q-ship might encourage the U-boat captain to make a surface attack rather than use one of his limited number of torpedoes. The Q-ship's cargoes were light wood, balsa or cork, or wooden casks, so that even if torpedoed they would remain afloat, encouraging the U-boat to surface to sink them with a deck gun. The crew might even pretend to abandon ship. Once the U-boat was vulnerable, the Q-ship's panels would drop to reveal the deck guns, which would immediately open fire. At the same time, the white ensign, Royal Navy flag, would be raised. With the element of surprise, a U-boat could be quickly overwhelmed. The first Q-ship victory was on June 23, 1915, when the submarine HMS C-24, cooperating with the decoy vessel Taranaki, commanded by Lieutenant Frederick Henry Taylor CBEDSCRN, sank U-40 off Plymouth. The first victory by an unassisted Q-ship came on July 24, 1915, when Prince Charles, commanded by Lieutenant Mark Wardlaw, DSO, sank U-36. The civilian crew of Prince Charles received a cash award. The following month an even smaller converted fishing trawler renamed armed smack Inverlion successfully destroyed UB4 near Great Yarmouth. Inverlion was an unpowered sailing ship fitted with a small 3-pounder, 47mm, gun. The British crew fired 9 rounds from their 3-pounder into UB4 at close range, sinking her with the loss of all hands despite the attempt of Inverlion's skipper to rescue one surviving German submariner. On August 19, 1915, Lieutenant Godfrey Herbert of HMS Baralong sank U-27, which was preparing to attack a nearby merchant ship. About a dozen of the U-boat sailors survived and swam towards the merchant ship. Herbert, allegedly fearing that they might scuttle her, ordered the survivors to be shot in the water and sent a boarding party to kill all who had made it aboard. This became known as the Baralong Incident. HMS Farnborough, Q5, sank SMU-68 on March 22, 1916. Her commander, Gordon Campbell, was awarded the Victoria Cross, VC. New Zealanders Lieutenant Andrew Dougal Blair and Sub-Lieutenant William Edward Sanders VC, DSO faced 3 U-boats simultaneously in the Helgoland, 17 Quetzales, while becalmed and without engines or wireless. Forced to return fire early, they managed to sink 1 U-boat and avoid 2 torpedo attacks. Sanders was promoted to lieutenant commander, eventually commanding HMS Prize. He was awarded the Victoria Cross for an action on April 30, 1917 with U-93, which was severely damaged. Perhaps remembering the early action aboard 17 Quetzal Ace, Sanders waited, while his ship sustained heavy shell fire, until the submarine was within 80 yards, whereupon he hoisted the white ensign and the prize opened fire. The submarine appeared to sink and he claimed a victory. However, the badly damaged submarine managed to struggle back to port. With his ship accurately described by the survivors of U-93, Sanders and his crewmen were all killed in action when they attempted a surprise attack on U-43 on August 14, 1917. There may have been as many as 366 Q ships, of which 61 were lost. After the war, it was concluded that Q ships were greatly overrated, diverting skilled seamen from other duties without sinking enough U-boats to justify the strategy. In a total of 150 engagements, British Q ships destroyed 14 U-boats and damaged 60, at a cost of 27 Q ships lost out of 200. Q ships were responsible for about 10% of all U-boats sunk, ranking them well below the use of ordinary minefields in effectiveness. The Imperial German Navy commissioned 6 Q-boats during the Great War for the Baltic Sea into the Handelsschutz flotilla. None were successful in destroying enemy submarines. The German Q-ship Schiff K heavily damaged the Russian submarine Jeopard of the Bars class on May 27, 1916. The famous Mao and Wolf were merchant raiders. A surviving example of the Q-ships is HMS Saxifrage, a Flower-class sloop of the Ancusa Group completed in 1918. She was renamed HMS President in 1922 and served as the London Division R&R drill ship until 1988, when she was sold privately and remains moored at King's Reach on the Thames. Interwar period. The United States had the Uss Goldstar Ak-12, a civilian cargo ship purchased in 1922. During the 1920s and 1930s, Goldstar became a familiar sight in the far-flung ports of Asia. Though assigned as flagship of the U.S. Navy at Guam, she made frequent voyages to Japan, China, and the Philippines with cargo and passengers. Prior to World War II, much of her crew was made up of Chamorro, natives of Guam, with American non-commissioned officers and commissioned officers. Goldstar became a bit of a veteran Q-ship dealing with communications intelligence as she moved from port to port and while in port in the Orient. As a station ship, she was assigned to monitor 1. Internal Japanese fleet frequencies, 2. Frequencies measurements, and DF or direction finder azimuths. She had 3 intercept operators and 1 chief radioman supervised by an officer. This all started in 1933 during the reconstruction of the Japanese fleet by Tokyo and continued into the summer of 1941. Goldstar, along with ground stations in Guam, Olongapo, and Beijing, provided significant intelligence before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Second World War. Germany employed at least 13 Q-ships, including the German-Dutch Atlantis, which sank a number of ships with a total tonnage of 145,960 tons, including the Norwegian tanker Tirana on June 10, 1940, and Skirbeck, which sank the British submarine HMS Tarpon. 9 Q-ships were commissioned by the Royal Navy in September and October 1939 for work in the North Atlantic. 6 10-ton HMS Chatsgrove, X-85, ex-Royal Navy P-class sloop PC-74 built 1918. 5,072-ton HMS Maunder, X-28, ex-King Gruffide built 1919. 4,443-ton HMS Prunella, X-02, ex-Cape Howe built 1930. 5,119-ton HMS Lamridge, X-15, ex-Botley built 1917. 4,702-ton HMS Edgehill, X-39, ex-Willamette Valley built 1928. 5,945-ton HMS Brutus, X-96, ex-City of Durban built 1921. 4,398-ton HMS Cyprus, X-44, ex-Cape Sable built 1936. 1,030-ton HMS Louis, X-63, X-Beauty built 1924. 1,090-ton HMS Antoine, X-72, X-Sorky built 1930. Prunella and Edgehill were torpedoed and sunk on 21 and June 29, 1940 without even sighting a U-boat. The rest of the vessels were paid off in March 1941 without successfully accomplishing any mission. The last Royal Navy Q-ship, 2,456-ton HMS Fidelity, was converted in September 1940, to carry a torpedo defense net, 4 4-inch, 10 cm, guns, 4 torpedo tubes, 2 OS-2U Kingfisher float planes, and motor torpedo boat 105. Fidelity sailed with a French crew, and was sunk by U-435 on December 30, 1942 during the battle for Convoy on 154. By January 12, 1942, the British Admiralty's intelligence community had noted a heavy concentration of U-boats off the North American seaboard from New York to Cape Race and passed along this fact to the United States Navy. That day, U-123 under Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan, torpedoed and sank the British steamship Cyclops, inaugurating Paukenschlag, literally, a strike on the kettledrum and sometimes referred to in English as Operation Drumbeat. U-boat commanders found peacetime conditions prevailing along the coast, towns and cities were not blacked out and navigational buoys remained lit, shipping followed normal routines and carried the normal lights. Paukenschlag had caught the United States unprepared. Losses mounted rapidly. On January 20, 1942, Commander-in-Chief, United States Fleet, Comanche, sent a coded dispatch to Commander, Eastern Sea Frontier, CESF, requesting immediate consideration of the manning and fitting out of Queen ships to be operated as an anti-submarine measure. The result was Project LQ. 5 vessels were acquired and converted secretly at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, Kittery, Maine. The Boston beam trawler MS Wave, which briefly became the auxiliary minesweeper USS Eagle, AM-132, before becoming USS Captor, PE-40. SS Evelyn and Caroline, identical cargo vessels that became USS Asterion, AK-100, and USS Attic, AK-101, respectively. The tanker SS Gulf Dawn, which became USS Bighorn, AO-45, and the schooner Irene Myrtle, which became USS Irene Foresight, 9-93. The careers of all 5 ships were almost entirely unsuccessful and very short. With USS Attic sunk on its first patrol, all Q ships' patrols ended in 1943. American Q ships also operated in the Pacific Ocean. One was USS Anacapa, AG-49, formerly the lumber transport Coos Bay, which was converted to Q ship duty as Project Love William. Anacapa was not successful in engaging any enemy submarines, although she is believed to have damaged 2 friendly subs with depth charges when they were improperly operating in her vicinity. Anacapa was also withdrawn from Q-ship duty in 1943 and served out the remainder of World War II as an armed transport in the South Pacific and Aleutian Islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy converted the 2,205-ton merchant ship, Delhi Maru, into a Q-ship. On January 15, 1944, she departed from Nagara, now Sadgara on Tokyo Bay, on her first mission in company with the submarine chaser CH-50 and the netlayer Tatu Maru. At 2200 hours that evening, the vessels were detected by the U.S. and Navy submarine USS Swordfish, SS-193, which launched 3 torpedoes. Delhi Maru was hit by all 3 on her port bow. Following a number of internal explosions, she broke in 2. The forward section sinking immediately and the aft section sinking later in heavy seas. Although the Swordfish was depth-charged by CH-50, she escaped unscathed. Proposed use against modern pirates. Attacks on merchant ships by pirates originating on the Somalia coast have brought suggestions from some security experts that Q ships be used again to tempt pirates into attacking a well-defended ship. Q ships in fiction. In Ernest Hemingway's novel Islands in the Stream, the main character Thomas Hudson commands a Q ship for the U.S. Navy around Cuba as he hunts the survivors of a sunken German U-boat. Malcolm Lowry's novel Under the Volcano, 1947, tells the story of Geoffrey Furman, an alcoholic British consul in the small Mexican town of Cuauhnahuac, on the Day of the Dead, November 2, 1938. Geoffrey Furman reflects back to his time as a naval officer during World War I, when he was court-martialed and subsequently decorated for his actions aboard a Q-ship. The captured German officers disappeared and were allegedly burned alive in the boiler. In Neville Shute's novel Lonely Road, 1932, the main character, Malcolm Stevenson, was a Royal Navy lieutenant on the Q-ship Jane Ellen, which sank a U-boat in World War I. The climactic battle of the novel Run Silent, Run Deep by Edward L. Beach pits main character Rich Richardson's U.S. submarine, Eel, against a Japanese anti-submarine team consisting of a Q-ship, the destroyer Akikaze, and a submarine. This team had killed several U.S. subs, two of them commanded by close friends of Richardson. Coordinated by the destroyer, the Japanese sub would ambush the American while it focused on shooting at the Q-ship. In the Clive Cussler Oregon Files series of books, the main base of operations is a Q-ship, a converted lumber carrier. The crew are mercenaries and former U.S. covered and military personnel who carry out missions around the world in support of U.S. policy while earning their living performing mercenary operations. As with other naval concepts, the idea of a Q-ship has also been applied to space vessels in fictional works. Q-ships feature prominently in David Weber's Honor Harrington series of books. Harrington destroys a Q-ship in the first novel, on Basilisk Station, and commands a squadron of Q-ships in the sixth novel, Honor Among Enemies. Harrington's snotty cruise captain, Thomas Bachfish, commands a pair of privately owned Q-ships in the 10th in the series, War of Honor. A Q-ship is the first command of Kimball Kinnison in the 1937 science fiction novel Galactic Patrol. The Oregon in Clive Cussler's series The Oregon Files is a refitted lumber carrier whose weapons include torpedoes, anti-ship missiles, 30mm chain guns and a 120mm cannon similar to the main gun on an M1 Abrams tank. In the Star Trek, Deep Space Nine episode Return to Grace, Major Kira and Gul Dukat convert a Cardassian freighter into a Q-ship to pursue a Klingon vessel which had destroyed an outpost. In the Starfleet universe, based on Star Trek, all major spacefaring races use Q-ships disguised as small and large freighters as convoy escorts to thwart attacks from enemy races and the Orion pirates. In the Shatnerverse, a series of Star Trek novels co-authored by William Shatner that are not a part of the non-canonic expanded universe's continuity, Captain James T. Kirk commands the SS Belle Reve, one of Starfleet's best Q-ships.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.